The stars wheeled above the battle-torn wreckage of the Marrow Belt, distant suns casting cold light on silent debris. Among drifting hulls and ruptured gunships, a single escape pod blinked weakly, its signal barely registering on the command vessel of the Galactic Empire's border fleet. The ship's AI pinged once, hesitated, then relayed the anomaly to the bridge. They found him unconscious, slumped against cracked restraints, blood dried in a narrow trail from his temple. One human, scarred, starved, silent, wrapped in scorched armor bearing no flag, no rank. The Empire's medics extracted his DNA from the bloodstains and paused. The sequence was unregistered. The species, however, matched an old, nearly mythical archive tag, Terran. Captain Elias Rain opened his eyes 48 hours later in a sterile white chamber aboard the Orzithkai, the Empire's flagship cruiser stationed near neutral space. He didn't speak for the first hour. He simply sat up, assessed the room, noted every exit, and then quietly asked for water. His voice was rough, but his composure was calm, too calm, the way a loaded weapon might be calm on a table. Imperial Command issued orders immediately. No mention of the human to any media streams. Biologicals were curious and unpredictable. The re-emergence of a supposedly extinct apex predator would stir too much instability. Instead, Elias was briefed, clothed, and placed under diplomatic observation, an arrangement that involved one translator, one psychologist, and a rotating pair of guards, always armed, though never obviously so. They tried to learn from him. He offered little. He refused to discuss his past or the ship he'd emerged from. When asked how he'd survived the vacuum surrounding a detonation zone, he replied simply, "It wasn't my time yet." The psychologist, a six-limbed quarry empath, described him as intellectually fortified, emotionally unreadable. The AI systems, designed to map behavioral patterns across species, failed to predict 87% of his actions during tests. It wasn't long before he drew attention from the military. High Strategos Vurex, whose crimson scales shimmered under the council lights, summoned Elias to a war room simulation. A training exercise against automated opponents. Elias was given a squad of Empire recruits and tasked with defending a station under siege. He didn't defend. He attacked, dividing his team, weaponizing the terrain, and capturing the AI commander's node within 13 minutes. The simulation hadn't been designed to allow that. He had rewritten the objective without permission and still succeeded. "You disobeyed parameters," Vurex said afterward, his tone edged with threat. "I achieved the win condition," Elias replied. "Winning isn't always the point." Then someone should have told the ones who wrote the war. Word spread. Soon he wasn't just tolerated. He was studied. Officers observed his training sessions, watching his techniques, direct, ruthless, adaptive. Soldiers whispered about the ghost from the Terran Wars even though no living soul truly remembered them. The legend built itself. The human who walked through fire. Who killed with nothing but silence and steel. Yet not everyone admired him. Senator Kraith of the Domari sector, long suspicious of militarized species, ordered a probe into Terran history. He found fractured records, continent-wide wars, chemical plagues, orbital bombardments, a dozen extinction events narrowly avoided or barely survived. Earth had vanished from star charts generations ago, assumed destroyed. But it hadn't been forgotten, only hidden, and now one of its remnants walked within the Empire. Elias noticed the shift. Subtle at first. Fewer invitations to the strategic halls. Guards who no longer spoke. A reassignment from frontline advisor to ceremonial envoy aboard the Nirenvox, far from where real decisions were made. He didn't protest. He watched. He memorized floor plans. He tested door response times. If they were planning something, he would know before they moved. Yet even amidst suspicion, alliances persisted. Tellen, a feathered tactician from the Zayari, remained friendly. She saw in him something more than threat. She saw grief, quietly buried beneath habit. Once, in an unguarded moment, she asked him why he fought so well. "I don't fight well," Elias said. "I just refuse to die easy." He spoke little more after that. Then came the mission. A rogue mining colony in the Veil Drift cluster had ceased communications. Piracy was suspected. Elias was assigned to an observation team, 3 Empire officers, 1 scout ship. It was meant to be routine. It wasn't. They found the colony stripped clean, bodies harvested for organ trade, black market tech rooted deep in the communications core. The pirates had been professionals. But what Elias found disturbed him more. Among the dead were 2 hybrid children, Domari and human. The sight stopped him. He stood in silence for long minutes, then silently requested the ship's fire control. Without waiting for orders, he vaporized the compound from orbit. The captain of the squad demanded an explanation. Elias offered none. Back on the Nirenvox, he filed no report. Only a single line in the log. Some fires don't need fuel to burn. They just need memory. And still, Empire Command said nothing. But the silence was louder than words. Behind closed doors, council members debated his status. Was he a relic, a risk, or a weapon? How long until one of their enemies sought to use him? How long until he decided he no longer needed permission? Elias sat alone in the observation deck that evening, watching the stars. They stretched forever, cold, infinite, indifferent. Tel-Len joined him, silent for a while. Then, you think they'll come for you? They always do, Elias said. And when they do, I remind them why they stopped looking for us in the first place. Her feathers shivered. You're not what they think you are, Elias. No, he said. I'm worse. Outside, the stars kept moving. And somewhere in the dark, the future took aim. The silence around Elias thickened. No formal accusations were made, no direct orders issued, but he felt the shift as keenly as a blade against skin. The patrols around his quarters doubled. The mission requests vanished. He was now a man with no battlefield and too many eyes on him. Whispers filled the halls of the Nirenvox. Officers fell quiet when he entered. Even the AI interfaces hesitated before responding to his commands, as though uncertain whether he remained an authorized user. He didn't ask questions. He watched. He counted. Patterns emerged, rotations of guards, unusual encryption layers on otherwise routine briefings, access logs with entries retroactively deleted. Tel-Len stopped visiting. He approached her once in the mess hall, but she diverted her gaze and kept walking, wings folded tightly. Fear, not anger, guided her. He understood. She was clever enough to know when the tide turned, and wise enough to survive it. Soon after, a classified memo from Senator Kraith reached the Emperor's private council. It carried a grim title, Project Terran, Psychological Analysis and Risk Potential. Based on decades-old Earth archives, it catalogued humanity's violent evolution. War had not been a catastrophe for humans, it had been a craft. From spears to atomic fire, from orbital bombardments to AI-driven genocide simulations, humanity had refined destruction the way others refined art or philosophy. Empires they had built, then burned. Peace treaties signed with one hand while the other drew a blade. The memo ended with a single, damning line: they are not extinct. They are waiting. In a dim, steel-walled briefing chamber, Elias stood before the Empire's internal tribunal. There was no trial, just a debriefing cloaked in civility. Vurex's scaled hand hovered near a sealed dossier. Kraith sat impassive, breathing through slits in his robes. No charges were read aloud. Instead, they presented Elias with images from the Veil Drift mission, the charred ground, the vaporized compound, the erased data core. You acted outside protocol, said Vurex. Elias didn't respond. Explain your behavior. There was nothing left to report, Elias said. Only what had been taken. Kraith leaned forward, his voice like sand against steel. You were never meant to last here, human. You're not a soldier. You're a cautionary tale. Elias looked at him. For a moment, no one breathed. I didn't come here to last, he said. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. They released him that day. Officially, his service was suspended for psychological re-evaluation. Unofficially, he was caged in orbit, confined to quarters, watched around the clock, his every message screened. The Empire did not arrest threats. It smothered them. It was then he decided to vanish. He waited for the cycle shift, when security rotated, when the external sensors reset for calibration. He scavenged old gear, disabled trace beacons with improvised electromagnetic bursts, and stole access to a minor diplomatic shuttle. The guards never even drew their weapons. Within 8 minutes, he was off the Nirenvox and punching coordinates into a jump drive he wasn't supposed to know how to use. But he didn't disappear into silence. 3 days later, a listening post in the Hadral Belt went dark. No debris, no distress calls. Just gone. 2 days after that, a munitions depot orbiting Gley Theta was found emptied, its vaults gutted, its security logs looped on a 5-minute replay. The only trace was a single phrase, etched into a bulkhead with a vibroblade: "You should have left me in the dark." A pattern emerged. Small but precise. Every strike hit systems connected to Imperial fleet logistics, fuel, data, armament. And none of them left casualties. Elias was not waging war. Not yet. He was sending a message: you started this. You won't finish it. Meanwhile, in the Empire's innermost chambers, panic bloomed beneath composed facades. Rumors spread like a virus. Elias had allied with pirates. He'd accessed ancient Terran weapons buried beneath forgotten moons. Some claimed he was the last of his kind, others insisted he was merely the first to return. Kraith called for a bounty, the first Level Z threat designation issued in over 2 centuries. Not for what he's done, he said, but for what he represents. We welcomed a human. Now we must survive the mistake. Vurex disagreed. Hunt him, and we prove the fear justified. But the decision was made. Kill orders were issued. Independent contractors activated. Fleet assets repositioned. They wanted him dead before anyone, enemy or ally, began to believe the legend. In the dark of space, Elias decrypted a stolen Empire directive with cold efficiency. The bounty notice didn't anger him. It clarified everything. They hadn't feared what he was. They feared that somewhere inside, under the scar tissue and silence, he still carried the blueprint of what humanity could be. He stared at the words on the display, then shut it down. Around him, the derelict listening post hummed with stolen energy, its lights flickering like pulse beats. He adjusted the power grid, restored shield resonance, and pulled a worn datapad from his jacket pocket. Inside it, blueprints, facility locations, asset codes, and a note from someone who hadn't betrayed him. Talon's encryption, barely masked beneath a fake broadcast loop: "I had to let them think I turned. You'll need this. You always planned to run. Now run smart." He smiled, just a little. No one ran forever. But some hunted longer than they were ever meant to live. Behind him, the power core surged, and the jump drive began to charge. Ahead, stars waited, silent, ancient, full of witnesses. Elias keyed in coordinates for the Empire's outer intelligence relay on Velkar 9. The first real blow would land soon. And it would be surgical. He wasn't just sending a message anymore. He was writing a war. The legend of the human spread faster than the Empire could contain it. Outposts whispered of sabotage carried out with surgical precision. Data cores vanished without triggering alarms. Fleet schedules leaked days in advance. Commanders began traveling with private security detachments, fearing their own ships might turn against them. What had once been an act of quiet suppression turned into a full-scale manhunt. Elias Rain was no longer a fugitive, he was a myth armed with memory, vengeance, and time. He never struck the same way twice. On Further, he impersonated an Imperial envoy and uploaded a virus into the fleet's logistical AI, rerouting vital supplies to phantom coordinates. On Nena's moon, he appeared for a single hour, dismantled an entire command terminal, and left behind a coded message etched into the polished floor: "Empire's rot from the inside." Each strike revealed knowledge he shouldn't have had. Security protocols, encryption layers, access hierarchies, he knew them all. It became clear he wasn't simply striking targets. He was unraveling their structure. The Empire's core began to fracture under the pressure. Vurex tried to hold the military together, but command infighting erupted as blame shifted from councils to admirals to entire sectors. Kraith pushed for martial law. "We made the mistake of calling him an exception," he said. "He is not an aberration. He is an echo." Tellen, long absent from public records, reappeared in a closed-door council session. Her feathers had dulled, her voice had lost its rhythm. "He trusted us," she said. "We taught him to fear what trust cost." She offered no defense of his actions, only a warning. "You're not chasing a man. You're chasing a consequence." They ignored her. 2 weeks later, Elias infiltrated the capital archipelago, 7 interlinked stations orbiting the core world Velis Prime. It was Empire Day, a spectacle of unity and pride, with dignitaries from over 60 systems in attendance. Security was at its highest. No one saw him enter. The auditorium swelled with anthems, banners unfurling across the viewing spires. As the Emperor rose to speak, the lights dimmed. A voice, calm, unmistakable, echoed through the chamber. 72 years ago, Earth burned. Gasps rippled through the crowd. You thought we died with it. You thought silence was the same as surrender. You thought wrong. Panic erupted, but the exits were already sealed. Screens flickered with projections, scenes of Empire atrocities hidden from public record, secret prisons, engineered famines, purged colonies. None of it was his doing, but all of it was the justification. You feared what I might become, Elias said. So you made me into what you fear. Vurex, standing in the command tower, activated the kill switch embedded in the floor. Nothing happened. The override code had been changed. A single drone, barely larger than a human hand, descended into view above the Emperor. It didn't carry a bomb. It carried a data shard. The Emperor stepped forward, hand trembling, and accepted it. No explosion followed. Just silence. A day later, the Empire's military command AI, Argyros, shut down. Every command relay, every predictive simulation, every battle protocol dissolved into blank static. Elias hadn't needed weapons. He had taken their mind. He didn't stay to see the aftermath. By the time Imperial search teams swept through the capital, he was gone. No transmission. No trace. Just one phrase engraved into the base of the Emperor's throne. You trained me to survive. I learned to win. The Empire reeled. Entire sectors seceded, emboldened by his defiance. Fringe colonies declared independence, invoking ancient Terran values of autonomy and self-determination. No new war erupted, only unraveling. The threat of Elias lingered like a shadow no one could step out from. They never caught him. Tellen retired from public life. In secret, she compiled fragments, recordings, decrypted broadcasts, recovered journal entries, and stored them in a protected archive labeled simply, Rain Protocol. The last entry was a message, never broadcast. I didn't come to destroy the Empire, Elias said. I came looking for peace. You taught me I couldn't have it. So I gave you a choice, be better or be broken. Years passed. Children on fringe worlds learned his name not as a curse, but as a warning cloaked in reverence. Books were written. Songs whispered among smugglers. Even in the core, among the Empire's most fortified minds, his story survived, not as history, but as caution. One day, long after the Empire stopped searching, a small freighter crew discovered an old relay station orbiting an uncharted planet. Inside, untouched by time, they found a single cot, a worn coat, and a datapad still humming with power. They played the file. A voice, gravel-edged and weary. If you found this, then you're what I wasn't. And maybe you'll do what I couldn't. The file ended. And so began something new. The world Elias had left behind struggled to redefine itself. In the wake of his vanishing, the Galactic Empire staggered, not from collapse, but from a disquieting awareness that its authority was no longer absolute. Entire systems began to question the cost of obedience. Silence became resistance. Bureaucrats rewrote doctrines to save face, while military officials whispered privately of contingencies. The name Rain was erased from official records, but the absence only deepened his legend. His war hadn't been fought with armies, it had been inscribed in memory, in doubt, in the growing spaces where control once ruled unchallenged. But absence is never static. 5 years after the Capitol broadcast, an encrypted signal echoed from beyond the spiral rim, bouncing through decaying satellites and decommissioned probes. At first, it was dismissed as residual code, until someone decoded the pulse signature. It matched the rain protocol. Not a message. A beacon. Tel-Len had kept her distance since retiring, choosing exile over complicity. She lived among the quiet layers of a drifting monastery ship, its people blind to war, devoted only to the language of stars. When the signal reached her, she didn't hesitate. She pulled the old coordinates, packed the datapad, and sent a single reply, "I'm coming." She didn't bring weapons. Only questions. The signal drew her to the edge of the Paradex expanse, where gravity was a whisper and time seemed to stall. There, hidden beneath the ruin of a shattered moon, was a facility ancient, pre-Empire, and far older than Elias. Its systems bore no insignia, no claim of ownership, but its central chamber hummed with stored data. And there, lying on a central slab, was a body. Not dead. Preserved. Suspended in cryostasis, Elias looked exactly as he had during the last days of the hunt, scarred, lean, quiet in sleep. The systems keeping him alive pulsed faintly, as if unsure whether to continue. Tel-Len approached the console, hand trembling. The interface responded to her biometric signature. A screen flickered to life. Authorization confirmed. Tel-Len Cryo. Then his voice filled the chamber, not live, but recorded. "If you're here, then I either chose wrong, or you're the only one I could still trust. Maybe both. Doesn't matter now. This isn't a prison. It's a seed. The Empire didn't fall. But it cracked. That was the point." She watched, breath held. "I didn't stay awake because I'd only burn it all down. I slept so someone else could build something new, someone who still believes in the future. I never did. I just couldn't leave the past alone." The message ended. Silence returned. Tel-Len stood over the cryopod for a long time. Elias had made a choice she hadn't expected, not to keep fighting, but to remove himself from a galaxy still unsure what to do with his existence. He had become too loud a truth. And so, he'd written an ending only someone else could finish. She debated waking him. She paced. She read the archive again and again. And then, she added a new entry. "You were wrong, Elias. You didn't kill the Empire. You gave it a mirror. Some turned away. Others are still staring. Maybe that's how real change begins." She left the pod sealed. Outside, the galaxy turned. Small revolutions kindled in quiet corners, scholars publishing forbidden histories, soldiers resigning their posts, colonies establishing new charters drawn not from dominance, but from mutual survival. None of them knew where the shift had begun. But they felt its pull. A movement born not of violence, but of disruption. Years later, in a university built on the ruins of a former Empire outpost, a student accessed a restricted archive. The file bore no metadata. Its voice was rough, unmistakable. "You don't need to remember my name. Just remember what happens when people stop asking permission to be free." The screen dimmed. And far beyond, beneath a ruined moon, a cryopod pulsed with quiet life, waiting, still.